Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temko and today we will be talking about Final Fantasy XIV, which is an MMO. Very straightforward, and it's not a new game at all. But in traditional MMO fashion, large updates that extend the story and massive expansions have kept the game filled with content and more things to do than you can imagine. And this has resulted in me diving back into the game to see what all the fuss is about with the Stormblood expansion. Now initially, my idea for this video was just to take a look at Stormblood, make a video out of it, and tell you what they have done with the new mechanics, new levels, new zones, new raids, etc, etc. But as I kept playing, and I played a lot of it, I kept comparing it to other games, to other MMOs, to other subscription-based models, other free-to-play based models, as I hadn't played a MMO actively since I quit Rift somewhere in 2012. And back then, I never really noticed these comparisons. And with the introductions of more and more games, more and more single-player games introducing microtransactions, however much we hate them, I figured it was time to take a look at games that have done this method for a very long time already, namely MMOs. So this video has extended well beyond the scope of just Stormblood and takes a look at the various mechanics and methods the game employs to keep its players engaged and interested, and well, keeps them from running out of content, keeps them from burning out too quickly and ending up quitting the game, which with a recurring subscription model is very much not a desired effect. But this effect becomes more apparent, and the ways Final Fantasy XIV has done so in excellent fashion becomes quite apparent when you compare it to other MMOs. In essence, welcome to MMO mechanics, the grandfathers of psychological warfare for your coin, time, and the masters of balancing annoyance, reward, and the desire to keep playing on that treadmill. So how does Final Fantasy XIV then fit into this? Well, as I said, the game does it immensely well, and out of the current available MMOs that are successful and relevant, it does so at the best possible level. In my opinion, there is no other MMO currently available, at least not in theme park MMOs, that does it as well as Final Fantasy XIV. And to understand how Final Fantasy XIV is able to balance this annoyance, this stretching of content, this treadmill with amazingly fun gameplay, we have to understand how MMOs make money. And this goes for every MMO, from Ultima Online back in the late 90s to World of Warcraft. And this comes in 4 distinct activities. First, obviously, is the retail box, whether you buy it in a store or you buy it online. This is generally the starting point for many games, and with collector's edition and specials editions and everything else, this is pretty much no different than any other game you can buy. Now for most games, that's really where it often ends, and with the introduction of DLC and microtransactions, that is changing as well, but for now, let's assume that's where it ends. Secondly is obviously the subscription fee. Now, traditionally, the subscription fee for an MMO has been around $15 or its regional equivalent. There are some different models in Asia as well as Eastern Europe and India, but in essence it's about $15 or whatever else it might be in your region. All in all, it really does boil down to the fact that you pay a monthly fee, and this has been the case since Ultima Online in the late 90s. And this fee hasn't really been affected by inflation at all. In fact, the few times games have tried to become more expensive, there has been some seriously massive backlash. Third is the additional services, and you can think of everything from renaming your character to transferring to other servers, or the ability to change your character's look and feel, or the ability to do something similar. Things that the game doesn't normally offer, things that are outside the scope of the actual game, but sort of convenience things you can buy to get a little bit of extra. Some games offer these for free, others do not. It really depends on the title and how big their player base is and how much they will swallow from the developer. And fourth is exactly that, the how much will they swallow. This is, in essence, buying additional goods. Now, in some games, it's fairly simple. EVE Online has Plex, which you can transfer for game time. That is an additional good you can buy. Additional goods are generally digital things. World of Warcraft had the famous $25 galactic horse thingy a couple of years ago that people could buy in the online store. And Final Fantasy does not lack in a variety of mounts, outfits, and other cosmetic things you can buy. And while some of these things are more in your ballpark than others as a preference, these are the 4 methods to which MMOs make their money. Now, the real reason we have to understand why this is a situation is, why do MMOs need to make this money, and why does Final Fantasy? Now, a part of it can very clearly be summed up by a very simple fact, is that companies like money, and if you're willing to pay for it, they're going to offer to sell it. So part of this is definitely under the sort of badly named greed segment, because some of the things they're offering, they can easily offer in-game at no additional cost, but they're not. And that is definitely part of the overall gaming genre. So Final Fantasy doesn't do it worse than others, in fact it does it often better. But MMOs do face several problems when generating revenue to create a profit that other games often do not. And Final Fantasy shows us the way with shining example on how to do that balance between raking in the cash from your player base and giving them a very good game. Let's dive into each one for Final Fantasy. To sell retail boxes though, you need people to care about your game, and there are in reality very few IPs well known or well loved or well hated as Final Fantasy. From the near universal praise to near complete damnation across 24 and more titles, the franchise has basically seen it all, and yet people still have a defined idea and a notion of what they expect from Final Fantasy. The very fact that people have this notion has given the title a chance to shine from way before the onset of whatever the game might contain. And in fact, this license is so strong, it was able to survive one of the worst launches in gaming history. A launch that required developers to perform a full 180 on the title and recreate large parts of their game from scratch. Now, having had a bit of success with the previous MMO in Final Fantasy XI, this allowed him to keep some goodwill from loving fans to survive that fiasco. But it was a fiasco because from world building, where large amounts of critique were based around the lack of diversity in scenery and reused maps and assets across the board, and the lack of engaging content instead being replaced by progression fights more reminiscent to the mid-2000s Korean free-to-play MMOs than any AAA published game that you might find in Western markets. In essence, it was a clusterfuck, and the developers knew it, and they spent months working on improving it. And even then, very few games could survive such a massive backlash and shift gear, and yet, with A Realm Reborn, Final Fantasy XIV was able to push, pull, punch, kick and claw its way to the top of the MMO pile yet again, even though many other MMOs have not only floundered, but have actively crashed and burned on much smaller missteps. So besides that very excellent IP strength, extremely solid marketing, and as mentioned, the overall good benefits for players that stuck with them during this time, mainly in free subscription time that has an actual monetary value, the very first steps with A Realm Reborn and subsequent steps with the Heaven's Ward and Bloodstorm expansions have given Final Fantasy XIV an excellent revenue stream to pull from and cover the upfront cost of developing their title. It's also added something that they didn't plan for but are reaping the benefits from even years later. And I say reaping the benefit, they obviously took a massive loss on the fact that they had to relaunch. So maybe reaping the benefits isn't the best way to put it, but it is the reality. Because players trust that the developers will do what is best for their game, and not just the bottom line that the stockholders or overall corporate overlords might want them to do. The fact or fiction of this belief isn't important, as this strong trust creates players that are willing to buy into the game with less trepidation, less hesitation, and less delay, meaning that they have a solid base of players willing to set their money where their mouth is based on previous experience in the developers being able to fix, solve, and spend time resolving issues even if they are available in the game at that point. Now, for most other titles, this is really where it stops. They might add DLC or an expansion, but they generally don't continue with development in the same manner an MMO does. One part of the team focuses on working on the big expansion years ahead of time, while the other works on various updates and balance fixes during the big expansion cycles. Now, this method in itself wouldn't be very impressive. Again, not much of what Final Fantasy does is impressive in terms of the activity they do, but how they do it. Because unlike many other MMOs and many other games in general, they are not only mixing progression in terms of gear grind, in terms of adding more fluff to the game, or just bug fixing during these patches in between expansions, but by mixing the gameplay progression of the story and lore, as well as the progression of crafting and raiding content between these big expansions into smaller updates that are still significant. It allows players to keep an interest at that next thing coming, and just simmering at a continued temperature, which obviously helps the development team in terms of content direction from feedback they receive during the life cycle of a particular expansion. But also, it helps by not forcing a massive amount of content up front. While there is room for development during a life cycle, this allows them to generally reuse assets they have introduced into the game, which is frowned upon when you do so with a new expansion up front. Obviously, there is no real bottom line difference here in a mechanical or analytical sense, but player perception often is the reality in these situations, and players are more receptive when you reuse a mechanic or reuse a character for a particular update than they are when you come out with a new expansion they plop down hard-earned cash for. Now, this gives Final Fantasy the perfect combination of lowering overhead in development, retaining player interest in new expansions, and overlap between the ongoing game and upcoming development. Obviously, none of this would matter from a purely objective standpoint if that content from those expansions and the big updates that players get for free during that time isn't enjoyable, isn't engaging, because if it isn't, it doesn't matter how much you add, players won't stick around. And this is where Final Fantasy puts down its stake, puts up its banner, and cries out that they do an amazing job. And a big part of this comes from the way they try to generate revenue from your recurring subscription. And the key word here is recurring, because while bringing out an expansion every 2 to 3 years is a good way to drum up a few new players to the title, most of the money for that game comes from people that are willing to pay up on a monthly basis to keep on playing. So how was Final Fantasy able to succeed in that department where everything short of the behemoth from Blizzard fell by the wayside a very long time ago and switched to free-to-play to still try and get in some cash from those wonderful people they call whales? Not only does Final Fantasy just generally do it better in terms of actual development, this isn't really the deciding factor how they have been able to keep on top of that pile and keep on expanding, because there are 5 components to the Final Fantasy method that draws players in and keeps them in and makes sure they keep on coming back just enough to warrant that monthly subscription. Obviously, they'd like you to be online more, but their goal at the bottom line is to be at least online enough to keep your subscription going. Now, as I said, I find that Final Fantasy does this in a very good way, if not the very best way, and if I'm very honest, I can say that I find Final Fantasy XIV to be the best theme park MMO that I've played ever. But this doesn't really change the fact that the game uses its very capable execution to pull and prod players in a direction where they feel you are going to spend your money. The underlying methods here are no different from a free-to-play mobile game or something that's being pulled out of the ass of some AAA corporate publisher. Like most MMOs, Final Fantasy gets you to level your character across a path with a lot of story content. But unlike many other MMOs, here the initial introduction to all the game's mechanics, dungeons, and related content is run through that main story. The game sets the stage for that very first step to keep you coming back to complete those much less interesting bits of content by having you get a little taste for them during the main story. This can be a dungeon, a challenging mob to kill, or an achievement to complete, even as simple as exploring the map. By introducing you to these mechanics during gameplay of the main story that is the most well fleshed out and engaging part, you're often reminded that there is a lot more content for you to explore. Now, to understand the very immense strength of this approach to Final Fantasy XIV, it's very important to know how Final Fantasy does its leveling and class systems, because unlike many other games, even MMOs, you do not need to level up multiple characters in Final Fantasy. Each character can eventually level up every class, and that allows you to switch between each of them on the fly. So the first time you're leveling, you're noticing a lot of content you might engage in where you level up a new class, already setting you up with the question, look how much there is here, why would you not level up another class? So following that main story, which I'll get into in a second further, the game sets the stage step by step for you to circle back around and scratch that itch where there is a bit of unfinished content. It's much easier for your human psyche to skip something if you've never started it. But when you start that challenge log, which lists a list of enemies for you to kill with rewards across the world, you want to sort of explore more of that very mechanic, see what else you can do with it. And the game keeps on teasing new features as you keep going. You might get bored of the main quest for a bit, but by extending that very feature, by the way they allow you to path and branch off, and the game knows to keep teasing more out of each feature, you might grow bored of it eventually, but by extending that feature, by extending the game's main story, by moving out the challenge log, by adding a sightseeing log, each part the game knows you will eventually get bored of. But by extending it, it keeps you going longer before you are pulled back into other content that suddenly might seem very shiny to you that you previously ignored. Obviously, you do notice a ton of side quests everywhere, but really you don't need them. and they only serve initially to inform and tease you to come on in because there's years of content, and look how good and involved and well put together that content is. This serves two purposes. It shows the player that they missed for possible leveling of other classes down the line, which obviously tries to pique the player's interest to do exactly that, and that brings the player back to older zones down the line where a lot of assets, content, and mechanics can be reused to increase the overall value from a development cost and entertainment value. Also, it obviously allows you to keep on playing longer while they don't have to reimagine and re-add new content at such a prodigious rate, because that is the bane of most MMOs down the line. Now, looking at this from a very analytical side, you might get the idea that some devious supervillain is poking and prodding you in some manner. And I repeat, the story content and pacing in Final Fantasy XIV is not just very enjoyable, but it is immensely good, and that makes a world of difference, and that is why Final Fantasy XIV is so enjoyable to play. You don't mind that you're being herded in this manner because step by step you are teased with various possibilities you can spend your time on at no added cost. No need to wait, no need to circle back around or make a new character. You can just step off the beaten path, step out of the main story arc, and do whatever takes your fancy, knowing that that excellent story arc is waiting for you just to go ahead and continue with many hours of play. As you are guided through the main story, the game is designed in such a way that the same story often, but not always, is enough to get you to the next level. This means that your introduction to the game is a very rich experience, with involved quest lines, lots of character development, cutscenes, and a world to explore. So you're traveling around a lot, you're teleporting around, you have a lot of dialogue options, and a lot of engaging content. And I cannot stress how much those characters and cutscenes help to make you want to continue experiencing the story, even if you have the party finder up to do dungeons in the meantime. You want to see more. Because if you get bored of following the story, again, just go on ahead and do many of the other features available in the title. Now, after you're done leveling, which will take you a while, the game does tend to slide back into its tried and true role of a theme park MMO, which is the MMO gear treadmill. Dungeons, raid, the collection of half a dozen currencies that you have gathered together loot for that you can upgrade again as soon as a new update rolls around and makes it obsolete for a new raid. And this piece of content is very much not for everyone, but in MMOs, a sizable portion of players enjoy this as much as others enjoy the leveling content. Each serves its own purpose and provides enjoyable gameplay for players, and each is designed to make it just challenging enough for players that rush to this stage of gameplay and ignore the story, but accessible enough for players to take a more casual or a less time consuming approach to playing the game. Obviously, this isn't something new to Final Fantasy, so I won't really spend that much time looking on it in particular, but it's a good note to have when you take a look at the game, at every feature, even when the game does something rote and mundane that many other MMOs have done in basically the same manner. The addition of that overarching, deep and rich questline with engaging mechanics makes up a world of difference, because this does extend into dungeons and raids. It's a minor thing, but a small cutscene introducing the boss to you with a nameplate and a little blob of text makes a humongous amount of difference the first, second, third, fourth time you run the dungeon. Because a large part of the game outside of the main story is about that treadmill, a gear treadmill by raiding, an achievement treadmill by getting achievements, a gathering, collecting, and house decoration treadmill where you run around wasting time in the world to get those resources. And this isn't a bad thing. Generally speaking, when I refer to a treadmill, it's in a negative manner, and a large part of this video's existence can be traced to Final Fantasy being able to implement these treadmills in excellent ways that not just minimize the annoyance you have with them, but provide extensive divergence in the way I play the game on a weekly and monthly basis. Because that is the core way of having players to come back and pay your recurring subscription fee. Granted, quite a few of these mechanics I'm not particularly a great fan of. I generally don't care about crafting or gathering or anything related to that in any way. So any effort put in by the game to get me enticed by those features or mechanics is met an annoyance on my part. And I'm sure other players have annoyance when the game forces them to do a raid or forces them to do a dungeon as opposed to their preferred story or casual crafting endeavors. But that is the core way of having players come back for recurring payments. The ability to engage players even when you sometimes miss out on a couple, and even when sometimes you might miss with one player and hit with another player, getting those players to come back on a monthly basis and open up their wallets does require the game to set out a wide net to catch people, and boy, does the game have a wide net. And it has a lot of stuff that it does that is so well put together that it takes a while to notice that it's just wasting your time. And I don't mean in the way that games are a waste of time. I mean in the way that the game does a couple of minor things that together take up a few minutes every time you do them. Coupled with the average playtime, coupled with some of the other things you do in the game, suddenly a good fifth of your gameplay is spent on these times wasters and you don't even notice because of the strength of the other 80%. An excellent example of this is the way the game does its Beastman reputation quests. With the various quests available to increase your reputation being fine and dandy most of the time, but as a player you are only limited to a set number of quests every day, and they don't stack up if you miss a day. So if you miss out on a reputation, you will need to wait even longer to complete the reputation quests. Not to mention, there's more Beastman tribes than you can complete quests for, which makes the entire thing more akin to a mobile game telling you buy more coins to continue, but it doesn't even have the common decency to offer that much because your money for the next month is what they're after and not a quick buck for you to throw at them. And this is the everlasting divide in even a game like Final Fantasy XIV. Have and keep on having an immense amount of praise for all its part that does show its ugly little head. Because yet, unlike a game like Rift, where the reputation quests nearly made me quit the game after grinding them time and time again as a hardcore raider because I needed a damn trinket and that was the best one for my particular build, Final Fantasy doesn't gauge your content in that manner to prevent you from enjoying the main game. And whether that main game is you enjoying the story, whether that main game is you enjoying raiding, the Beastmen and side objective quests from challenge logs to achievement hunting don't limit you in the other areas of the game. They might help you in some manner, but never in a manner that allows you not to get to them in any other way. An example of this is something called the Primals, a kind of mini raid where you just kill a single boss in a staged fight. They could easily have done this that requires you to have a certain standing with the Beastman tribe to kill the Primal. But this gap in lore and world building is overlooked not to annoy players over much. Sure, the Beastman quests are a pain in the ass because the quests are boring and annoying due to the repetitive nature of doing the same thing over and over, but because there is no content gating, all you will get out of them is a different looking mount or at best some decoration for your in-game house. And it's not gated away from content that rewards you, so combining that engaging story with very good solid dungeon content, the game keeps it content padded when this runs out, and it won't run out anytime soon if you're new players, because even for me it took me over 100 hours of playing the game to even complete the main story up to Stormblood's latest stage at level 70, and that's with one class at level 70. I haven't even gotten around to get leveling any other classes outside of a few endeavors here and there in the low levels. And this is where my true enjoyment of Final Fantasy very much shines through. Because of the way the game doesn't gate content away, it allows you to things like open world combat that gets you NPC points for your NPC faction of choice that you can trade in for coins that you can use to pay your NPC minions to go out and gather for you, not requiring you to gather resources for yourself. And this multifaceted picture where you can mix your content you enjoy, skip the content you dislike, and bridge the gaps, while inefficient in many cases, allows you to keep playing a game that stays fresh and enjoyable across the board. And while this coin example is but one, there are a dozen more, but this is where the game does start showing its massive annoying mobile gaming escapades yet again, with many of the NPC minion related tasks requiring real world time to complete, and having no method to queue up ahead of time. You are tasked with various daily bonuses to keep on logging in, and if you keep logging in, you're more likely to do stuff and you'll be more willing to keep that subscription going. And if you don't, you always feel bad because you're missing out on something that isn't that hard to do. A daily dungeon run to get a bonus gold and experience injection that you only get once a day is very annoying if you're already having trouble logging in often enough to keep on leveling at a pace you find enjoyable. And this is part of the way the game does balance that engaging story, engaging content, with some annoying daily grind shite. Because if you're repeating traveling across the world between cities and locations and buildings and NPCs and wasting a lot of time, but then that waste is covered up by a colorful animation to keep you entertained while you're basically playing the online equivalent of whack-a-mole with your daily bonuses. It's not exactly fun, but while the game distracts you from that part, of the daily bonuses being tedious and annoying, actual content they trigger is engaging and fun. So while you are logging in thinking, ah damn, I have to do those dailies, by the point you're actually doing them, you're enjoying the gameplay they lead up to, which is a very devious and excellent way to do something if you want to keep players engaged. And even with my annoyance about those Beastman quests, even with my annoyance at this daily grind, there is something cute about a little pixie wanting me to plant carrots inside a tavern so the owner loses his mind. And I've done that quest at least 24 times, and I've smiled like a 5-year-old every single time doing it. And in the end, engaging story or demanding raid aside, when a game can craft a throwaway repetitive quest that can make you smile repeatedly out of the gates, you know they've got their bases covered in every other area. Because if the game did nothing else, I'll call it a day and call it good. But between the option to be anything from a blood magic wielding sword swinging tank to a bona fide culinarian, the chance to own your own house and many other things, the game offers a ton of content. And like any game, you will run out of stuff to do, or at least stuff you enjoy doing. I am not personally someone that enjoys crafting, as I said, and I find myself avoiding it in Final Fantasy as well. So overall, at first place, I came into Final Fantasy expecting a carefully crafted theme park that I might enjoy for a week or two before I became bored of the repetitive nature of a theme park MMO. Instead though, of finding that repetitive annoyance, I found a deeply enjoyable game that kept opening more and more content as I went in further. Every time I felt I was getting bored, there was a new challenge to provide just a bit more excitement, resulting in me spending over 300 hours in the title, which, while for many MMO players might not sound like a lot, for me, who generally plays a game only long enough to get a review out, if that, 300 hours is the result of months of playing. And that's me paying a subscription for a game where I've barely touched 1/10 of its content. Now, sadly, as I said before, Final Fantasy has been invaded by the very ecosystems it grandfathered, with extensive options available through the online store to buy items, cosmetics, emotes, mount XP boosts, and other ways to fluff up or skip content, which does seem to be an increased reality in the games industry across the board. And while the vast majority of these items can also be gotten during gameplay, it's a bit irksome that the amount which the digital item in the game gets sold for about half the price of the entire expansion that has hundreds of hours of content. Some business decisions I really will never understand, but from top to bottom, I truly do enjoy Final Fantasy XIV, and the various ways it has done a tremendously good job of keeping players engaged, even with a myriad load of time wasters and methods where you know they're messing with your mind to keep you from playing, you don't really care, or at least I don't. And with Final Fantasy XIV, I do hope you find some enjoyment in it as well. If you don't like raiding, the story content gives you months of gameplay. If you do like raiding, it gives you endless hours of engaging, exciting raid content. And if you enjoy other things like crafting, economies, or even if you enjoy just decorating a house, the game does offer everything for every niche in that regard, which is a truly excellent piece of content. And unlike many other MMOs that are available right now, not only is it not nickel and diming you, even with the online store, you get the full pack and parcel, and that somehow makes it a more interesting and enjoyable experience, as opposed to many of the free-to-play MMOs currently out on the market. As I said, a game like Final Fantasy requires 4 ways to make money: the box, the subscription, the additional services of transferring servers and whatnot, and the online additional goods. And while the fourth one is one I generally don't like, even in Final Fantasy, the second part, how they earn my recurring subscription, is the core focus here, because there is no other way for an MMO to survive to make sure its players keep playing. And it's an incentive that many other games don't really have. When you buy a box and ship it out of the gate, they have your money, and whether you play the game 1 hour or 100, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But for an MMO with a subscription service, you keeping on playing is the reward, because that means you're paying a subscription, and they are engaged and interested and want to keep communicating, engaging, and developing content that players want to play. And obviously, they find a balancing line between annoying you, dragging out your time, and giving you excellent content. But Final Fantasy has so much excellent content that annoyance can easily be forgiven in many scenarios. And that is why I feel Final Fantasy XIV right now is very much the best MMO I have played ever. So thank you for watching this weird off-the-cuff video, because I felt I had to do something with 300 hours of gameplay in a game I have never talked about in length. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, press that like button. If you didn't, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, do hit that subscribe button down below, and we will deliver. And if you want to support GuyLogicGaming through other means, there is a link to our Patreon page down in the description below that makes sure this entire business keeps its lights on. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.